We're in pretty much the heart of hemp country here.
The large Nebraska hemp industry was centered around Fremont, where the mill was located, and we're right in the heart of that country now. If you'd been here around the turn of the century, you would have seen these fields that are now full of corn, full of hemp.
This is typical of this area of eastern Nebraska because you had a huge industry here around the turn of the 20th century, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, that was growing hemp fiber for the grain binders, the new invention that made the wheat belt open up in this area. And they felt that hemp could be a valuable domestic fiber since they were having to import the fiber for the grain binders. And a mill was built in Fremont, which is just nearby, and the surrounding agriculture, whereas today you find corn, 100 years ago you would have found hemp. And then the industry declined, but hemp doesn't have trouble going feral. In other words, the domesticated crop became a hedgerow weed. And there's hardly a hedgerow you can find in this part of Nebraska that isn't filled with this degenerate form of the hemp. And when I say degenerate, I mean that it has been over 100 years of natural selection for survival in the wild. There's a lot more bushiness and more seed production rather than the single stalks that you would have in a hemp field if it was being grown agriculturally. You look around, you see every plant has a unique identity in terms of morphology. This is just because the plant over time has gone back to the wild. Like a dog running with wolves, it has become feral. Here's interesting variation over here. This plant appears to be purple. It's not an uncommon genetic trait that one can find in hemp, and it's getting expressed in this little population here. You see, some years ago, the DNR of the states of Kansas and Missouri and Nebraska convinced the authorities not to eradicate the feral hemp because it supports the pheasants and the game bird populations. If there's snow in the wintertime, hemp has its head above the snow where the birds can get at it, so it's very, very important to the wild bird population of this area. Hemp is your premier bird seed. The birds love it, and these plants are doing a very nice job of producing hemp. So every year their seed falls to the ground, and the next year you have a new crop. And each year it's a mixture of every type you could imagine. Just incredible fragrance. You like your terpenes? You got your terpenes, man. It's incredibly fragrant.
Yeah, it'd still be on the plant.
This
Sure.
has got they each have a kind of a unique quality to the perfume of the plant. Go from plant to plant and get a whiff off from it. They're each different. Agronomic hemp has a hollower stem because it was better for the yields of fiber, and you can see that hollow stem character here. Although these plants have, by natural selection rather than artificial selection for human desired traits, these plants have degenerated back towards a wild kind of state, but you still see all cannabis has a potential for a hollow stem. But Kentucky hemp, that this is a remnant of the Kentucky hemp variety that was used in North America, was noted for its hollow stem.
of course, the plants that we see along the hedgerows all over this area, it's thick. I mean, you can't see a hedgerow that doesn't have some feral hemp growing in it. But it's highly variable because hemp, by its nature, is genetically heterogeneous, and when left to natural selection, it's going to go off every which way. There were two separate phases, you might say, of the Nebraska hemp experience. The first one was when David Meyerly tried to bring hemp to the Native Americans on the reservations, which took place in the 1840s, and probably is the source of the feral hemp that grows out through the sand country and western Nebraska and Kansas, South Dakota. But around the turn of the century, for the 1900s, there was an industry that grew up because of a need for fiber to be used with the new grain binder harvester system. And it was believed that hemp could be a valuable domestically produced fiber for that industry. And that industry began here in the Fremont area, but would have been based on a new type of hemp which had come into existence after the previous episode with Meyerly and the Indians. So you have actually two different germ pools. A very important event happened in the history of hemp when, around 1850, missionaries from China brought hemp seed to this country. Prior to that time, the hemp had traced its lineage to European standard land races that had been brought over here and were started in the New England area, and that had become the staple domestic hemp. But after 1850, the Chinese germplasm met the European germ pool, technical term, in the Kentucky area, and a whole new type of hemp emerged that came to be known as Kentucky hemp, and it really developed into the world's best hemp. Unfortunately, it's now effectively extinct, but the remnants that we have are these feral stands, of which the one that we're viewing today is a very important repository. You have to view it as a repository of genes, of genetic material we call germplasm, that would be important in a revived hemp breeding program, such as the U.S. government ran until they terminated it in 1933. So we lost, after the government terminated the hemp breeding program of Lister Dewey at the USDA, they didn't maintain the lines that were developed by Dewey, which was the best hemp in the world. Had named varieties. We had varieties like China Mington that was rated the highest yield, and all that germplasm, which should have been stored in a responsible way, was allowed to go extinct. So we don't have the Kentucky hemp varieties anymore that we developed in this country after 1850, which is a tragic loss. You know, I mean, you can go back a long, long way and start discussing the history of hemp. The history in the New World begins right away with the Plymouth colony. Probably the first hemp down here in the lower part was planted maybe around 1623, I think, is the earliest date that I've seen. But I believe there's an even earlier date for Canada. So the first hemp in North America was probably planted up somewhere in the Canadian provinces.